There have been countless stories of Israeli depravity in their 15-month genocidal war on Gaza, but this is up there as among the most shocking. In the Israeli 972 magazine, it's reported that last May, Israeli soldiers used an 80-year-old man as a human shield and then killed him. The report is based on testimony from Israeli soldiers who were present when all of this happened. They told Israeli investigative outlet The Hottest Place in Hell that soldiers in Gaza City came across an elderly couple in Gaza City in May who told them they had been unable to move south due to mobility issues. So in this case, the man had to use a cane to walk. I mean, you've seen all those scenes of people sort of walking with all their stuff from north to south Gaza. Obviously, it's very difficult if you're 80 and you have a stick. Now, this is what happened next. At that stage, the commander decided to use them as mosquitoes, one soldier explained, referring to a recently exposed procedure by which the army forces Palestinian civilians in combat zones to serve as human shields to protect soldiers from being shot or blown up. Several soldiers detained the woman at her house, while the man, using his cane, was made to walk ahead of the brigade soldiers. He entered each house before us so that if there were explosives or a militant inside, he would take the hit instead of us, one soldier explained. So this is, I'm going to give you some more details in a moment, but let's just be clear. This is Gazan people, Palestinians, being treated by Israel, not being treated, being used explicitly as human shields. Now, you'll remember at the start of the genocidal war, back in October, November, December of 2023, we would hear endlessly that the reason why so many civilians were being killed in this war is because Hamas used Palestinians as human shields. Now, what they meant when they said that is that Hamas has its sort of military infrastructure in urban areas. Now, that's probably true, right? But this is a much more explicit use of people as human shields. Because obviously, if you're fighting a guerrilla war, your military sort of equipment is generally going to be where people live, right? I'm not excusing it. I'm just saying that's quite normal, right? If you're fighting a guerrilla war, then your military infrastructure is going to be embedded in sort of civilian populations. That's how it worked in Algeria, how it worked in Vietnam, how it worked in Gaza. But using people explicitly as human shields is in finding a civilian and then getting them to walk in front of soldiers to stop the soldiers being attacked. That's much more explicit. Right? That's much more intentional in a way. And this story gets worse. According to one of the soldiers, before starting the sweep, an officer took a detonation cord, an explosive fuse attached to connect charges and explosives, attached it to an initiating charge, and tied it around the elderly man's neck so he wouldn't run away, even though he was walking with a cane. He was told that if he did anything wrong or didn't follow orders, the soldier behind him would pull the cord and his head would be torn from his body. After 8 hours like this, the soldiers brought the elderly man back to his home and ordered him and his wife to evacuate on foot towards the humanitarian zone in southern Gaza. According to the testimonies, the soldiers did not inform the nearby forces from different divisions that an elderly couple was about to cross through the area. After 100 meters, the other battalion saw them and immediately shot them, a soldier said. They died like that in the street. Now, so many parts of this story, so shocking. How dehumanizing it is. You're seeing these people not as humans, clearly, if you're tying sort of detonation devices around an old man's neck so that he can't run away when you're getting him to walk in front of you so that your soldiers don't get shot, right? Using him very explicitly as a human shield. And then because they didn't tell, the other sort of troops that these people were then going to try and go to southern Gaza, they immediately get killed. Now, you might think, do Israeli soldiers really need to be informed that there are civilians around to not shoot dead an elderly couple? But apparently not. If you're an elderly couple walking around in Gaza in May, you get shot dead. And if you're alive, you might get used as a human shield. Right? This is what our government was supporting for all this time. And of course, this incident was back in May. Thankfully, the ceasefire held this weekend. So coming up to the present day, meaning the people of Gaza will be spared an immediate return to full-blown war in situations like this. Their lives, though, are still being devastated by Israeli actions. You'll remember when Hamas threatened to stop releasing hostages last week. They cited Israel continuing to block temporary housing, heavy machinery to clear rubble, fuel, and other humanitarian aid from entering Gaza. Those hostages were ultimately released, and Palestinian captives were exchanged as well. But Al Jazeera reports that Israel is continuing to block the entry of mobile homes and tents into Gaza. So last week, Egyptian state TV broadcast footage of trucks loaded with temporary container houses lined up for inspection at the Rafah crossing. Yet as of today, not a single temporary house has been allowed to enter Gaza, and only 20,000 of the agreed 200,000 tents have been allowed in. Israel has also continued to destroy houses in Gaza since the ceasefire came into effect. Satellite footage shows that between the 19th of January and the 1st of February, Israel demolished and bulldozed 64 buildings in the city of Rafah. So this is after the ceasefire was agreed. They're still destroying houses. Of course, before the ceasefire was agreed, Israel had already destroyed or damaged the majority of buildings in Gaza. And by the time it came into effect, over 50,000 people had been killed, many of them women, many of them children. And today, the BBC has released a new TV documentary showing the genocidal war on Gaza through the eyes of 3 children. The program is called Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone. It's available on iPlayer now. The film focuses on the daily lives of an 11-year-old Zakaria, a 10-year-old Renad, and a 13-year-old named Abdullah. It's Abdullah who features in the following clip.
Right here used to be my grandfather's house. About 40 people were here, including me and my family, for a few months.
Warplanes dropped massive bombs here. We'd already been displaced 4 times when this happened.
It will take years to rebuild Gaza. This area used to be colorful. Now it's gray, just gray. People are leaving the eastern areas of Khan Yunis again.
3 miles away, the Israeli army have announced an evacuation order. They're looking for Hamas and its leader, Yahya Sinwar. When the Israeli army call an evacuation order, you have to leave fast, or it can be deadly.
ايش بصير؟ زي ما انت شايف يا اخي. ايش بصير؟ فجأة في دقائق يلا امشوا في دقائق حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل في العرب. ايش اللي بصير؟ خشوا علينا اليهود.
So that's documentary footage from while the war was still going on. I mean, the thing it just makes me think about is, you've got all these destroyed houses. So you're going back to rubble, essentially where your home used to be. And I mean, anyone who survived that situation you just see is going to have quite severe PTSD. You're going to be incredibly sort of mentally distressed. You have no home. And I suppose the other thing that this makes me think about is when we keep hearing sort of Donald Trump say, well, of course they'll want to leave. It's a dump, it's a demolition site. Then that is actively incentivizing really Israel to not let in any mobile homes, right? Because the whole argument is the reason we should let them, or sort of quote, the reason we should let them, which is code for force them to leave to another country, is because they have a terrible standard of living. So Israel is being sort of actively incentivized. Not that they needed any incentive, but sort of what Trump is saying is providing the logic to make their lives as terrible as possible to justify the ethnic cleansing that he wants to facilitate. Ash, a number of things to sort of talk about here. I mean, what stands out to you from sort of some of these elements of what's going on in Gaza and what has gone on in Gaza over the past year?
I think the first thing to talk about is your description of just the most gratuitously cruel and malevolent war crime of forcing an 80-year-old man to walk with explosives tied around his neck. That kind of story would be familiar to many people around the world who've experienced colonial occupation. Um, Many people who were subject to colonial occupation and ethnic cleansing would describe acts of the most gratuitous cruelty, dehumanization, and uh, psychological warfare, because that's a part of what colonial oppressors do. So the idea that this is, a form of asymmetric warfare, I think it crumbles when you look at how the IDF actually conduct themselves. When you hear about a story like that, which, as you pointed out, and I think it's worth repeating, has been reported by IDF soldiers, right? Palestinians have been talking about the myriad cruelties they've experienced for years. It hardly gets any media coverage. Even this story is not being covered by the likes of, the BBC or the New York Times or CNN. And it's coming from the horse's mouth. Um, Palestinians have been talking about this for 4 years. They're not considered by much of the media establishment to be a reliable source of information. But even when it comes from IDF soldiers themselves, there is something of a conspiracy of silence. There is a veil of silence being drawn around it because it undermines the idea of Israel being, a lawful or legitimate actor. It undermines the sort of both sidesism. Now, had that been a report of, something that a Hamas fighter did during October 7th, or something that Hamas fighters did, during the war since October 7th, guarantee it would be all over the news. The same as when we look at the condition of Palestinian captives when they're being released from Israeli detention, when they are emaciated, when they are released with fewer limbs than they went in with, when they are showing signs of torture, of beatings. It hardly causes a ripple. When you see signs of starvation, trauma amongst Israeli hostages, then not only does it dominate the news agenda, it has this power to shape the political agenda as well. There is, I know that I've said this an awful lot in the past year, but I think one of the things that causes me the deepest and most profound shame as a British citizen and someone who is also a journalist is that our government, our media is complicit in Israel's project of dehumanizing the Palestinian people. And we're complicit in it through, nearly every aspect of our media coverage and, nearly every element of our political consensus.